The contractor asked me if I wanted to see the demolition plans before they tore out the kitchen. I was standing in my grandmother's living room, still in my service uniform, 26 hours off a transport flight. And a man I'd never met was showing me blueprints for destroying the only place that had ever felt like home. "Your aunt approved everything last week," he said, flipping through pages on his clipboard. "We're scheduled to start demo on Monday." I looked at the kitchen doorway, at the faded wallpaper my grandmother had chosen 40 years ago, at the window where she used to stand watching birds at the feeder. Then I looked back at him. "There's been a mistake," I said. "This is my house." I should start at the beginning. The real beginning, before the lawyers and the demolition crews, and the moment my aunt's face turned the color of old concrete. My grandmother raised me. Not officially, not on paper, but in every way that mattered. My mother, her youngest daughter, had what the family politely called difficulties: addiction, instability, a rotating cast of boyfriends who ranged from indifferent to dangerous. By the time I was 7, I'd learned to sleep with my shoes on in case we needed to leave quickly. By the time I was 9, my grandmother had seen enough. She didn't make a scene. That wasn't her way. She simply showed up one afternoon with a casserole dish and a suitcase and told my mother she was taking me for a little while. The little while lasted 9 years. The casserole dish, I later learned, was a prop. She'd brought it empty, just to have something in her hands so she wouldn't look like she was there to steal a child. Grandma's house was a 3-bedroom Cape Cod on a 1/4 acre, built in 1962 and updated exactly once in 1987, when she'd added a half bath off the mudroom. The kitchen had Harvest Gold appliances. The living room had shag carpet in a shade of green that had probably been stylish during the Nixon administration. The whole place smelled like lavender sachets and the particular mustiness of houses that have been loved longer than they've been renovated. I adored every inch of it. The first night I slept there, I cried into a pillow that smelled like fabric softener and safety. I'd never had a room that was mine before, just corners of apartments, couches in living rooms, mattresses on floors that belonged to whoever my mother was with at the time. But Grandma had prepared a room for me. Pink curtains, a white bedspread, a lamp shaped like a ballerina that she'd found at a garage sale and rewired herself. "This is yours," she said, standing in the doorway while I looked around. "Nobody takes it away. Nobody sleeps here but you." I didn't believe her at first. I'd learned not to believe promises about permanence. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the room stayed mine. The curtains faded in the sun, the bedspread collected stains from late-night hot chocolate, the ballerina lamp burned through 3 bulbs. And slowly, carefully, I started to understand that some promises were meant to be kept. My grandmother was a practical woman. She'd worked as a bookkeeper for 32 years, raised 3 children mostly alone after my grandfather's early death, and managed to pay off her mortgage by 60. She believed in hard work, sensible shoes, and telling the truth even when it was inconvenient. She also believed in me, which was something no one else had bothered to do. She taught me things my mother never had: how to balance a checkbook, how to cook a meal that wasn't from a microwave, how to sew a button, change a tire, read a contract before signing it. Practical skills, survivor skills, delivered without fanfare in the Harvest Gold kitchen, while the radio played oldies, and the afternoon sun slanted through windows that needed washing. "Knowledge is the only thing no one can take from you," she said once, showing me how to file taxes. "Money goes, houses burn down, people leave, but what you know stays in your head forever." She also taught me about family, specifically that family wasn't always what you expected it to be. "Your mother loves you," she told me when I was 12 and bitter after a missed birthday visit. She just doesn't know how to show it without hurting herself. Some people are like that. Doesn't mean they're bad, means they're broken in ways we can't fix for them. Then why did you take me in? I asked. If she's your daughter? Grandma was quiet for a moment, her hands still in the dishwater. Because sometimes loving someone means protecting the people they can't protect themselves. Your mother couldn't keep you safe, so I did. You're going to be someone, she told me once, when I was 14 and convinced I was destined for the same chaos my mother had chosen. Not because you're special, but because you're stubborn. Stubborn people survive. When I told her I wanted to enlist after high school, she didn't argue. She didn't cry or tell me I was making a mistake. She just nodded slowly and said, "You'll need good boots. Let me give you money for good boots." That was her way. Practical support. No drama. Just showing up with what you needed, whether it was a casserole dish or boot money or a home when yours had fallen apart. My Aunt Patricia was different. She was my grandmother's oldest daughter, my mother's polar opposite. Stable, successful, married to an accountant named Randall who had opinions about investments and golf, and not much else. Patricia had always treated my grandmother's house like a waiting room. She'd visit on holidays, comment on how dated everything looked, leave behind suggestions for improvements that Grandma politely ignored. Patricia had done everything right by conventional standards. Good grades, good college, good career in real estate before she semi-retired to manage her own properties. She had a house in the suburbs that looked like a magazine spread, all coordinated colors and strategic staging. She hired people to maintain her lawn, clean her windows, manage the details that Grandma handled herself with a worn pair of gardening gloves. She'd never understood why Grandma didn't sell the Cape Cod and move into a nice condo somewhere. The neighborhood had changed, Patricia argued. Property values were stagnating. The house needed updates that would cost more than they'd return. It was financially irresponsible to stay. Grandma had smiled politely at these lectures and continued watering her flower beds. "This kitchen could be gorgeous with some updating," Patricia would say, running her hand along the laminate countertops. "Open concept is really the thing now. You could knock out that wall, add an island." "I like my walls where they are," Grandma would reply. "They've been holding up the roof just fine." "But the resale value." "I'm not selling. I'm living. There's a difference." Patricia would sigh the sigh of someone dealing with an unreasonable elderly person, and the conversation would move on. But I saw the way she looked at the house when she thought no one was watching, measuring, calculating, planning. She wanted the house. She'd never said it outright, but everyone knew. She had plans. She'd mentioned them at family gatherings, talked about eventually turning the property into something worthy of its potential. The lot was good, she'd explained to Randall when she thought I couldn't hear. The location was solid. Tear down the old structure, build something modern, flip it for a profit. Easy money. In her mind, I think, my grandmother was just a temporary obstacle between her and a renovation project. What Patricia didn't know was that my grandmother had plans of her own. I was deployed when Grandma got sick. Pancreatic cancer, the same cruel diagnosis that seems to appear in too many of these stories. She'd been feeling tired for months, had finally gone to the doctor when the fatigue turned into something sharper, and within 6 weeks, she was gone. The timeline still haunts me. 6 weeks. 42 days from diagnosis to death. She'd called me twice during that time. Once to tell me about the diagnosis, her voice steady and practical as always, and once to say goodbye. "I've made arrangements," she said during that second call. The connection was bad, static crackling between us, but I could hear the weakness in her voice. "Howard has everything. The lawyer. You remember him? Grandma, don't listen to me." Her voice sharpened, finding strength somewhere. "Patricia's already circling. She called yesterday asking about the house, talking about preparing for the inevitable. Don't let her change anything. Don't let her tear it apart. I won't. Promise me. I promise. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing, labored and slow. You were the best thing I ever did, she said finally. Taking you in, watching you grow, knowing you'd be okay. Grandma, I have to go now. The nurse is here. A pause. I love you. Remember, stubborn people survive. The line went dead. 3 days later, so did she. I couldn't get home in time. The Red Cross message reached me. Emergency leave was approved, but the logistics of extraction from where I was stationed meant I arrived 2 days after the funeral. 2 days after they'd put her in the ground without me there to say goodbye. I'd requested the earliest possible transport. I'd begged, pleaded, pulled every string I could find. But military logistics don't bend for grief. And by the time I touched down on American soil, my grandmother was already buried in the cemetery next to my grandfather, the plot she'd bought and paid for 30 years earlier. Patricia had handled everything. The service, the flowers, the reception at her house instead of Grandma's. She'd been efficient about it, I was told. Organized. She'd even started cleaning out the house, boxing up Grandma's things to make it easier for everyone. I should have known then. I should have recognized the speed for what it was. Not efficiency, but opportunity. But I was grief-sick and jet-lagged and focused on getting to the only place that still felt like home. I landed at the airport at 6 a.m, rented a car, and drove straight to the house. I needed to be there. I needed to stand in the kitchen where she'd taught me to make pie crust, sit on the porch where we'd watched thunderstorms roll in, breathe air that still held some trace of her. What I found instead was a construction zone. The front yard had been torn up, the old flower beds my grandmother had tended for decades replaced with surveyors' stakes and orange flags. A dumpster sat in the driveway, already half full of debris I couldn't identify from the street. The front door was propped open, and I could hear voices inside, men's voices discussing load-bearing walls and permit timelines. I walked in like I was entering hostile territory, careful, alert, ready for anything except what I actually found. The living room had been stripped. The green shag carpet, ugly, beloved, irreplaceable, had been torn out, exposing subflooring marked with chalk lines. Grandma's furniture was gone, either hauled away or shoved into corners and covered with plastic sheeting. The wallpaper in the hallway, the pattern of tiny roses she'd chosen when she was a young bride, hung in torn strips, where someone had started removing it and given up halfway. And there, standing in the middle of my grandmother's kitchen with a contractor's clipboard, was my Aunt Patricia. She saw me and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, honey," she said, moving toward me with arms outstretched. "I didn't know you were coming today. You must be exhausted." I didn't hug her back. I couldn't. I was too busy staring at the hole in the wall where the doorway to the dining room used to be. "What is this?" I asked. Patricia's smile flickered. "We're updating the house," she said carefully. "Opening things up. It's going to be beautiful when it's done. Grandma liked her walls where they were." The contractor shifted uncomfortably. Patricia's expression hardened, just slightly, into something more honest. "Grandma isn't here anymore," she said, "and the house needs work. It hasn't been touched in decades, the electrical alone." "Whose house is it?" The question landed like a grenade. Patricia blinked. The contractor suddenly became very interested in his clipboard. "I'm sorry," Patricia said. "Whose house is it? Legally, right now? Whose name is on the deed?" "Well, that's being sorted out," Patricia said. "The estate is in probate, but as the eldest daughter and the executor—" "You're the executor?" "I handled everything while you were away." She said the word like it was a euphemism for something shameful. Someone had to. Your mother certainly wasn't going to, and you weren't here. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Have you read the will? Patricia's face shifted again, confidence flickering into uncertainty. The will is being processed. These things take time. But Grandma and I discussed her wishes years ago. The house was always going to. Have you read the will? I repeated. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. My grandmother's lawyer was a man named Howard Finch. He worked out of a small office above a hardware store downtown, the kind of practice that handled wills and property disputes and the quiet legal needs of people who didn't have money for flashier representation. He'd known my grandmother for 30 years. He'd drawn up her will. I called him from my rental car sitting in the driveway of a house I'd just been told wasn't mine. I've been trying to reach you, he said when he heard my name. There are matters we need to discuss. Urgently. I just saw the house. A pause. Ah. My aunt is tearing it apart. She says she's the executor. She says she's handling the estate. Patricia filed paperwork last week claiming executorship, Howard said carefully. I've contested it. Your grandmother named you as executor, not her. The will is very clear on this point. The world tilted slightly. Me? You. And there's more. Another pause. Your grandmother made significant changes to her will 8 months before she passed. Changes she specifically instructed me to keep confidential until after her death. He cleared his throat. I think you should come to my office. Today, if possible. Before your aunt does anything else to that house. I was there within the hour. Howard's office was exactly what I expected. Cluttered, comfortable, filled with the particular chaos of a man who knew where everything was despite appearances. He offered me coffee from a pot that had been warming since morning, then sat across from me and slid a document across the desk. This is your grandmother's last will and testament, he said. Executed 8 months ago, witnessed and notarized. It supersedes all previous versions. I read it slowly, carefully, the way I'd learned to read mission briefs and technical manuals, legal language, precise and deliberate. And there, in plain black ink, the words that changed everything. The house, the property, all of its contents, everything was left to me. Not to Patricia, not to my mother, not divided among the children. To me. The granddaughter she'd raised in secret, the stubborn girl she'd believed in when no one else did. There was more. A letter, handwritten, tucked into the envelope with the will. My dear girl, if you're reading this, I've gone somewhere I can't write you from. I hope the journey was peaceful. I hope you weren't too sad. I know Patricia expected the house. I know she has plans. She's been making them for years, walking through my rooms like a buyer at an open house, measuring spaces, imagining changes. She sees potential where I see memories. That's always been her way. But this house isn't potential. It's history. It's the place where I raised my children, where I raised you, where I learned that family isn't always blood and love isn't always loud. I want it to stay standing the way it is. Imperfect, outdated, full of ghosts who aren't ready to leave yet. You understand that. Patricia never will. The lawyers will help you sort out the details. I've left you some money, too, enough to keep the place maintained, to pay the taxes, to fix what actually needs fixing rather than what looks unfashionable. Don't let anyone tell you the house needs to be something else. It's already exactly what it should be. I'm proud of you. I always was. Even when you were 9 years old and angry at the world, I knew you'd find your way. Stubborn people survive. Take care of my house. Take care of yourself. All my love, Grandma. I sat in Howard's office for a long time after I finished reading. The coffee went cold. The afternoon light shifted through the window, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back since the Red Cross message. The grief, the guilt, the rage at arriving too late. When I finally looked up, Howard was watching me with patient eyes. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "we stop the demolition." The cease and desist letter was delivered to Patricia's house that evening. I wasn't there, but Howard told me about it later. The way her face had changed when she read it. The immediate phone call to her own lawyer. The raised voices audible through the windows. The contractor packed up the next morning. He'd verified the property records, confirmed that the estate was in dispute, and decided he didn't want to be caught in the middle of a family lawsuit. Smart man. Patricia came to the house while I was assessing the damage. I heard her car pull up, heard the aggressive slam of her door, heard her heels clicking up the walkway. I met her on the porch. "This is a mistake," she said without preamble. "Grandma wasn't thinking clearly at the end. She was sick. She was confused." "She executed the will 8 months before she died," I said. "She wasn't sick yet." Patricia's jaw tightened. She didn't understand what she was doing, leaving everything to you, a granddaughter she barely saw, who was off playing soldier somewhere. "She raised me." My voice was calm. I'd learned that from the military. The colder the situation, the steadier the voice. "She raised me for 9 years while you visited on holidays and talked about how dated her kitchen was. I was building a life, a career. I couldn't what? Couldn't be here? Couldn't notice when she got sick? Couldn't wait until the will was read before you started tearing her house apart?" Patricia's face flushed red. "I was making improvements. The house was falling apart." "The house was fine. It just wasn't what you wanted it to be." She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the desperation beneath the anger. "I spent years waiting for this," she hissed. "Years planning. Randall and I have an investment strategy, a timeline. We were going to flip this property, reinvest the profits. It's not a property," I said. "It's a home. My home. Grandma's home. And you don't get to flip it. This isn't over." "Yes," I said. "It is." She contested the will, of course. Filed papers, claiming undue influence, diminished capacity, all the legal phrases that lawyers use to challenge documents they don't like. Howard had anticipated this. He'd kept records of my grandmother's mental state, had witnesses to her clarity, had documentation of her instructions that went back years. Patricia's lawyer was aggressive, but ultimately working with weak material. He argued that my grandmother had been emotionally manipulated by a granddaughter who rarely visited. He claimed the secret nature of the will change proved something was wrong. Why would a woman hide her intentions from her own daughter unless she was being controlled? Howard countered with evidence. Letters my grandmother had written me over the years, full of clear thinking and deliberate affection. Medical records showing her mental acuity remained sharp until the final weeks of her illness. Testimony from neighbors, from her doctor, from the women in her church group who'd known her for decades. And then there were the earlier documents, drafts and notes my grandmother had kept, dating back 5 years, outlining her reasons for leaving the house to me. She'd known, even then, that Patricia would contest. She'd prepared accordingly. "My eldest daughter sees this house as an asset to be liquidated," she'd written in one note, her handwriting steady and sure. "My granddaughter sees it as a home. I know who I want holding the deed when I'm gone." The judge read that note aloud during the hearing. Patricia's face went white, then red, then a mottled combination of both. Randall, sitting beside her, stared at the floor. The case lasted 4 months. 4 months of depositions and hearings, of Patricia's lawyer trying to paint me as a manipulative opportunist who'd somehow convinced an elderly woman to disinherit her own children. 4 months of Howard calmly, methodically, dismantling every argument with documentation my grandmother had spent years compiling. She'd known this fight was coming. She'd prepared for it like she'd prepared for everything else, practically, thoroughly, with the quiet determination of a woman who'd survived worse. Patricia spent money she didn't have on lawyers who couldn't change the facts. I learned later that she'd taken out a loan against her own house to fund the legal battle. So certain was she that the will would be overturned. When the judge ruled in my favor, she wasn't just losing my grandmother's house. She was losing the money she'd bet on getting it. In the end, the court upheld the will. The house was mine. Every outdated appliance, every faded curtain, every memory embedded in walls that Patricia had wanted to tear down. I stood on the porch after the final ruling, looking at the surveyor's stakes still dotting the front yard, the dumpster still sitting in the driveway. The contractor had left his debris behind when he fled the legal dispute. The flower beds were destroyed, the lawn torn up, the front of the house looking like a wound that hadn't started healing, but it was mine. And wounds heal. I spent my leave repairing what Patricia had damaged. The contractor she'd hired had done more destruction than construction. Walls partially demolished, floors torn up, electrical exposed and left dangling. It took weeks just to make the house livable again. I hired my own contractor, a quiet man named Luis who specialized in restoration rather than renovation. He understood, without me having to explain, that the goal wasn't to modernize. The goal was to save. "This wallpaper," he said, running his hand along one of the torn strips in the hallway. 1960s. They don't make this pattern anymore. He looked at me. "I know a guy who does custom reproductions. It won't be cheap. Do it." He smiled, the first smile I'd seen from him. "Your grandmother lived here?" "She raised me here." He nodded slowly, like that explained everything. Maybe it did. The work took longer than I'd hoped. Some things couldn't be saved. The green shag carpet was gone, hauled away in Patricia's dumpster before I'd even arrived. The original light fixtures from the living room had been removed and discarded. The built-in bookshelves in the den, the ones my grandfather had made by hand in 1965, had been torn out to open up the space. But we saved what we could. Luis tracked down matching hardware for the kitchen cabinets. He found a carpet remnant in a similar shade of green. Not the same, but close enough to honor the memory. He rewired the house to code without destroying the original character, hiding modern safety behind vintage aesthetics. I worked alongside him when I could, learning how to patch plaster and refinish hardwood and do the 100 small tasks that keep old houses standing. My grandmother had taught me that knowledge was the only thing no one could take away. Now I was adding to that knowledge, learning her house the way she'd known it, intimately, practically, with my hands as well as my heart. I didn't restore everything to exactly what it had been. Some of what was destroyed was gone forever. The original wallpaper, the green shag carpet, the particular character of rooms that had been unchanged for decades. But I saved what I could. I found matching wallpaper for the hallway, the same tiny roses my grandmother had chosen as a young bride. I refinished the hardwood floors that had been hidden beneath the carpet. Floors my grandfather had walked on, that my mother had crawled across as a baby, that I had crossed 1,000 times on my way to the kitchen for late-night hot chocolate. I kept the kitchen mostly as it was, Harvest Gold appliances and all, because Grandma had cooked 10,000 meals in that kitchen, and I wasn't ready to erase her from it. The ballerina lamp still worked. I put it back in my old room in the same spot where it had glowed through my childhood, and I swear the light felt warmer than any modern fixture could. My mother came by once during the renovation. She stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure she was allowed inside. Her hair was grayer than I remembered, her face more lined. The years hadn't been kind to her, but then again, she hadn't been kind to the years. I made her coffee in Grandma's kitchen, using the same percolator that had been there since I was a child. The familiar sound of it brewing, the gurgle and hiss, the smell of coffee filling the air, seemed to relax her slightly. We sat at the same table where I'd done homework as a child, where Grandma had taught me that stubborn people survive. "She should have left it to me," my mother said, but there was no conviction in her voice, just the reflexive complaint of someone who'd spent her life expecting disappointment, and usually receiving it. "She left you something," I said. It was true. There was a small inheritance, enough to help with treatment if she ever decided to seek it, enough to get her into a stable apartment and keep her there for a while. "She left you a chance." My mother wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, staring into it like she might find answers there. "I used to live here too, you know, before everything went wrong. This was my room upstairs, the one with the window seat." I knew. The window seat was still there, built into the wall beneath a window that looked out over the backyard. I'd sat in it 100 times as a child, reading books while rain streamed down the glass. "She never stopped hoping you'd come back," I said quietly. "She used to leave your room the way it was, just in case." My mother's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. I couldn't. Every time I came here, I remembered who I was supposed to be. It was easier to stay away. "Easier for you." "Yes." She didn't argue, didn't defend. "Easier for me, not better. Just easier." We sat in silence for a while. The percolator finished its cycle. Outside, I could hear Luis and his crew working on the front porch, replacing boards that had rotted beneath Patricia's construction debris. "She raised you right," my mother said finally. "Better than I could have." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't enough. But it was honest. And from her, that was something. "You could still get help," I said. "The money she left you, it's enough for a program, a real one, if you wanted to try." My mother looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, some calculation I couldn't read. "Maybe," she said. "Someday." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. And for us, that was something too. Patricia stopped speaking to me entirely. Family gatherings became exercises in careful avoidance. She'd leave when I arrived, or I'd leave when she did. Randall followed her lead, his loyalty apparently extending to her grudges as well as her ambitions. Their children, my cousins, chose sides in the quiet way children do, and most of them chose their mother. The rest of the family took sides in the quiet way families do, through invitations extended or withheld, through comments made just loud enough to be overheard. Some supported Patricia. She was the eldest, after all, and daughters traditionally inherited from mothers. Others supported me, either because they believed I deserved the house or because they'd seen Patricia's behavior and found it wanting. A few, the wisest ones, refused to take sides at all. "Family fights about money always end badly," one of my great-aunts told me at a holiday gathering, the first one after the court ruling. "Doesn't matter who wins. Everyone loses something." She was right. I'd won the house, but I'd lost whatever relationship I might have had with Patricia, with Randall, with their children. I'd won my grandmother's legacy, but I'd split the family in ways that might never heal. I told myself it was worth it. Most days I believed it. I didn't mind the estrangement. I had the house. I had my grandmother's letter, framed now, hanging in the kitchen where she used to watch birds at the feeder. I had proof that someone had seen me, truly seen me, and decided I was worth believing in. The bird still came to the feeder, by the way. I kept it filled. The same mix of seeds Grandma had always used. Cardinals and blue jays and little brown sparrows that hopped along the windowsill. Sometimes I'd stand at the kitchen window watching them, and I'd swear I could feel her standing beside me, nodding in approval. Some things don't need to be updated. Some things just need to be maintained. I still serve. The house waits for me between deployments, maintained by a neighbor named Ellen, who I pay to check on things. She waters the plants I've added to the restored flower beds, makes sure the pipes don't freeze in winter, collects the mail that accumulates when I'm gone for months at a time. Ellen knew my grandmother. They'd been friends for 20 years, part of the same church group, the same circle of women who looked out for each other in the quiet ways neighbors used to do. When I first approached her about maintaining the house, she refused payment. "Your grandmother would haunt me if I took money for this," she said. "She loved that house. She loved you. Keeping an eye on things is the least I can do." I insisted on paying anyway, and eventually she accepted. But she still does more than I ask for. Fresh flowers on my grandmother's grave every month. A casserole waiting in the freezer whenever I come home. The small kindnesses that keep communities together, passed down from one generation to the next. Someday I'll retire there. I've already started planning it. The porch swing I want to add, the garden I want to expand, the way I'll spend my mornings drinking coffee in the Harvest Gold kitchen, while the radio plays oldies and the sun slants through windows that I'll probably never get around to washing. I'll sit on the porch where Grandma and I watched storms roll in. I'll cook in the kitchen where she taught me that knowledge is the only thing no one can take away. I'll sleep in the room where I first learned what it felt like to be safe, with the ballerina lamp glowing softly in the corner. The house isn't valuable by most standards. It's old, it's outdated. It's worth less than the land it sits on. A real estate appraiser would list all its flaws: the aging electrical, the vintage plumbing, the foundation that settled slightly over 60 years. Patricia was right about the numbers. The house would be worth more torn down and rebuilt. But Patricia was wrong about everything else. Some things aren't measured in market value. Some things are measured in the weight of memories, in the shape of a life lived fully, in the knowledge that someone believed in you when no one else did. My grandmother's house is all of those things. It's history. It's home. It's proof that love doesn't have to be loud to be lasting. I keep her letter in the kitchen, framed and hanging beside the window where she used to watch birds. Sometimes, when the light is right, I read it again. The familiar handwriting, the practical instructions, the closing line that still makes my throat tight every time. Stubborn people survive. She was right. We do. If you're listening to this and something resonated, if you've ever had to fight for something that mattered more to you than it could ever be worth, I want you to know this. The people who see only potential often miss what's already there. The people who want to tear things down don't always understand why some things need to stay standing. My grandmother believed in walls where they were. She believed in me, and she made sure that belief would last longer than any renovation plan. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever inherited something that someone else thought should be theirs? Did you fight for it? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. We share stories like this every day here at Her Service, Her Story. Stories about inheritance, protection, and the quiet ways people leave their love behind. If you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe and stay with us. Let's keep walking this path together.